Yeah, broadcasting.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and get it started. I got my notes up. Are we recording now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, good evening and welcome to our debate. My name is Vertice Shirley, and I am the introducer for our debate team. The topic we will debate today is service delivery for transition age youth and adults, empowerment versus care. We will be conducting this debate in an informal format, developing our argument for empowerment using supported employment, vocational rehabilitation, and transition services. And we will develop our argument against care by using barriers of cost for vocational rehabilitation, failed transitional services, and employers' negative outlooks. Let's begin by introducing our team. We have Jessica Bowles as our summarizer and Kendall Perry as our researcher for both sides of the argument. Henrietta Hand as our illustrator and Ashley Formosa as our fielder. As outlined by IDEA, transition services are designed to facilitate the youth with disabilities movement from school to post-secondary education, employment, housing, social relationships, and healthcare. With the appropriate support and gradual exposure, the adolescents with significant life challenges can learn how to trust and engage with others. They can become a part of their community, develop self-efficacy, and become competent as they transition into adulthood. As reported by Autism Speaks, 50,000 teens with ASD turn 18 each year without marketable skills. And in 2009, the percentage of youth and adults with autism had, oh, that's not good. I got misprints. Had a job with most half that of all the youth. That's wrong. Okay. With nearly 90% of unemployment and underemployment rates for individuals with ASD, job prospects for adults with autism are crushingly bleak. Often due to communication and or barrier challenges, students with autism have limited opportunities for career development and work experiences while in high school. They lack the employment for adults with autism. The lack of employment for adults with autism creates a heightened sense of isolation, despondency, and dependence on others, which negatively impacts our society as a whole. So, empowerment versus care. Let's begin the debate by defining these terms. Empowerment. Empowerment is defined as an acquired knowledge and learned skills needed to maximize independence and self-sufficiency. The most effective transition education program includes a collaborative learning environment that stimulates real-world experiences and incorporates daily community-based instruction in a natural setting. IDEA's federal special education law requires that school districts assist students with disabilities in making their transition from school to work and life as an adult. Agencies such as career centers and vocational rehabilitation are very helpful in assessing the individual's strengths and preferences. It is important that an individual with autism have opportunities such as volunteering, internships, and job sampling to build their strength and minimize their challenges before their work experience begins. Now I'll define care. Care is defined as human service agencies along with educational agencies convening interdisciplinary teams which work collaboratively with adolescents and their parents and or caregivers. These teams then create comprehensive education transitions, care or treatment plans for the individual with disabilities. Typically, these teams are convened for adolescents. Typically, these teams are convened for adolescents and are involved in adolescents who are involved with multiple child and family serving systems, who are thought to be in need of intensive support. Care can also be defined as systems of legislation, laws, people, and institutions that impede or withhold progress of specific individuals. Care can be isolating. Care can be misinterpreted as affection and help in certain instances, or disguised as supportive, but really is only beneficial to one party involved. Care impacts the individual's ability to become empowered. Now, Jessica will come to us with the summaries. Jessica, take it away.
So, as previously stated by Vertice, we define empowerment as acquired knowledge and learned skills needed to maximize independence and self-sufficiency. With that definition in mind, and for the purpose of this debate, empowerment will include supported community employment, vocational rehabilitation services, and transitional services. These three topics intertwine and each utilize different but similar methods and concepts to give the individual with a disability the empowerment necessary to become as independent as possible. I will now continue on by briefly summarizing each topic before Kendall explains further the research found to support each of these empowering concepts. To start, supported employment refers to the use of a job coach or employment specialist to obtain employment within the community. Supported employment increases independence by taking individuals with disabilities out of the traditional segregated setting of a workshop or day service and providing an environment in which the individual is integrated into the community for work, increasing the socialization between that person and other typically developing individuals. Kendall will now discuss the research found in support of supported employment.
In a study by Cook et al., 1,273 individuals with mental illness from facilities in 7 different states were randomly assigned to either a supported employment group or a service as usual condition and followed for 2 years. The service as usual varied between states as the facilities were given leeway in choosing their comparison conditions. The participants were interviewed every 6 months, and employment status along with services were tracked on a weekly basis. After 2 years, the experimental group were more likely to achieve competitive employment and were more likely to work 40 or more hours in a given month. Participants in experimental groups also had higher earnings per month. In other studies, 6-day treatment centers converted their services to supported employment. In one sample, the participants were considered to have no rehabilitation potential and had been at the day program for 8 years. There were 317 participants and 187 in the comparison group. The follow-up data showed that 38% of the experimental group were competitively employed compared to 15% of the comparison group. Bannerman, Sheldon, Sherman, and Harkick suggest that federal and state faculties want to promote and empower individuals, as these services will provide needed skills to lessen the overall impact of government funding. Individuals with disabilities should be empowered and taught daily living skills, have choices about how and what they will learn, taught how to make choices, and overall how to exercise their rights to make their choices in any and all settings that they live, perform, and exist.
Furthermore, as stated by Vertice, transitional services are defined as the period of time when adolescents are moving into adulthood and are concerned with planning for education, careers, healthcare, financial benefits, housing, and independent living. With that in mind, the goal of transitional services is to educate and empower the individual and their team with making the best plan for that person's future post-school, which will promote independence and focus on their goals and interests. Kendall will now discuss research in support of transitional services.
Trainer, Morgenstar, and Murray took data from the National Longitudinal Study, or National Longitudinal Transition Study, and using a secondary analysis, examined the characteristics and quality of transition services for those with high incidence and disabilities. The sample included 2,400 students with high incidence disabilities who were surveyed and interviewed, along with teachers and school administrators. They found that nearly all students with high incidence disabilities were receiving transitional services. Another positive finding was that the majority of the students, educators, and families played a significant role in transition services. This type of involvement has been empirically linked to successful post-school transitions. Moderately positive student outcomes were reported for adolescents who received transition services that pertain to independent living skills, self-determination skills, money management, and employment-related skills.
Finally, vocational rehabilitation is a process in which a counselor, known as a VR counselor, will work with a team, which consists of the individual wanting employment, their employment specialist or job coach, and whatever other team members necessary, which could be parents, guardians, a close mentor, paid staff, etc., to come up with an employment goal. The VR counselor will then provide professional counseling to overcome potential barriers that individual might come across while searching for or training in community employment. VR is an empowering tool for individuals with disabilities that wish to gain employment based on their services. Kendall will now discuss research found on vocational rehabilitation.
In a study of 5,000 participants from 3 different disability groups, data was taken from United States Department of Education Rehabilitation Service Administration to analyze employment outcomes. The disability groups that were studied included sensory communicative disorders, such as visual or hearing impairment, physical disabilities, such as arthritis or spinal cord injury, and mental impairments like depression, schizophrenia, or learning disabilities. The effectiveness of vocational rehabilitation counseling was examined, and the data showed that 62% of the group that received VR were gainfully employed. The group with the sensory and communicative disabilities had a significantly higher successful employment rate of 75% compared to people with physical disabilities who had 56% and people with mental impairments who had 55%.
So now for team care. Care is defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary as many things, one being things that are done to keep someone healthy, safe, etc. Based on this definition, we will use the definition of care as providing advocacy for an individual that is understood to be incapable to do so themselves to keep that individual safe and healthy. Also noting, care was previously defined as systems of legislations, laws, people, and institutions that impeded or withhold progress of a specific individual. Care can be isolating, care can be misrepresented as affection and help in certain instances or disguised as supportive, but is really only beneficial to one party involved. Care impacts an individual's ability to become empowered. In a nutshell, the team is there to support the individual and basically protect him or her from the negative stigma that comes from having a disability diagnosis by providing care. For the purpose of this debate, team care will represent the barriers of the costs of vocational rehabilitation, failed transitional services, and the negative outlook employers have on hiring individuals with disabilities. I will now continue on by briefly summarizing each topic before Kendall further explains the research found to support each of these caring concepts. To start, Social Security pays vocational rehabilitation agencies to provide these counseling and supported employment services. Basically, it costs federal dollars to provide VR counseling and supported employment services. The cost of VR services varies depending on the disability and the length of time that individual is receiving VR services. These costs also vary depending on the state, as each state has their own budget. For example, from 2013, California spent $525,123,818 between federal and state funding, serving 72,030 people, while Michigan spent $119,032,502 in 2004 between federal and state funding, serving 34,435 people. Based on Florida Legislators' Office of Program Policy Analysis and Government Accountability VR memo from January 2015. Kendall will now discuss more research on why VR costs would support team care.
The rapid rise in the rate of autism has led to concern about the affordability of supported employment in the future. As autism rates rise and more people need services, costs rise as well. In a study of the database of the Rehabilitation Services Administration by Samara and Cohen, the cost of the effects of vocational rehabilitation were analyzed. The sample included 11,569 individuals who received VR services from 2002 to 2006. For this study, the term successfully employed was defined as a case being closed because an employment outcome within an integrated setting had been obtained. All other reasons for closure were coded as unsuccessfully employed. In 2002, 1,534 people with autism received VR services, and by 2006, that amount increased by 121% to 3,397. The study showed that for every extra dollar earned by individuals with autism, it cost the VR program $26.74. The study also showed that the cost of VR services was higher for those with autism than for other populations. These higher costs, in addition to the 10 to 17% annual increase in the rate of school-age children with autism, paints a picture of exponentially higher costs of VR in the future.
Next, transitional services. While great in theory, have not been proven to have a great follow-through. As stated previously, transitional services are formed so all members of that individual's team are present and on the same page to empower the person's independence. With that being said, it can oftentimes be difficult for all team members to follow through with their specific duties. From personal experience working in employment services, I've heard parents of clients fresh out of high school saying that their case manager did not know about a specific service or their teacher was unaware of the next step for their child. Many failed attempts at transitional services have been documented. Kendall will now discuss failed transitional services in further detail.
Data was examined from the National Longitudinal Transition Study to determine predictors of successful employment outcomes of special education students. 2,000 students were followed for 4 years, and the data showed that some of the predictors included career awareness training, computer skills, and having had a job while still in high school, but receiving vocational services in high school and transition planning during high school had no association with gaining competitive employment. This signifies that the current transition services are not meeting the needs of this population. Other data for this study, which included parental interviews, showed that 23.5% of parents rate transition services as not useful at all, and 48.4% stated it was only somewhat useful.
Finally, it is no secret that there is a negative stigma that comes with having a disability. When you state that so-and-so has a disability, unless taught otherwise, majority of people will automatically think of someone in a wheelchair or not being able to speak. Employers who are not taught otherwise will think that employing someone with a disability is going to be more work than what they need. There are many myths to hiring someone with a disability, such as people with disabilities don't have the right skills for business, accommodations cost too much, hiring people with disabilities will make the employer vulnerable to litigation, and many more. Kendall will now discuss research found to support the idea that employers have a negative outlook on hiring people with disabilities.
In a survey by Kay, Jans, and Jones, HR professionals and supervisors working for employers who did not always comply with ADA standards were asked why employers did not hire people with disabilities. The results showed that the primary reasons were lack of awareness as to how to deal with workers with disabilities and their accommodations, and fear of being stuck with a worker who can't be disciplined or fired because of the possibility of a lawsuit. Other reasons that 70% of responders agreed upon are difficulty assessing an applicant's ability to perform job tasks, concern over extra costs, and concern about job performance. With more awareness and training for employers, some of these ideas can be challenged without the need for supported employment. Bannerman, Sheldon, Sherman, and Harkick addressed the ideals around care also surround facilities, and I don't know what that's supposed to say, and the institutions who serve those with disabilities. Third parties often assume the right to choose and provide for individuals under their care. Activities, schedules, and simple preferences are made on behalf of those with a disability because it's simply easier and more time efficient for workers to make these choices on their own without causing potential behavior or disruption to the lives of those they serve. Freedom of choice and basic liberties are in turn taken on by service workers and third parties as it improves administrative time and costs. These decisions also appeal to the board of directors. In care facilities, personal liberties such as individuals having an input on their treatment when appropriate, and any choices and opportunities are made on behalf of staff to keep situations calm, structured, and efficient, avoiding unnecessary inflation as addressed by VR. Some services remain focused on the options of third parties and use of these pressures to enable services that are cost effective and minimally disruptive.
Jessica.
That's it for our part for this summarizer.
You did not have the,
Until the
you didn't add the in conclusion?
Isn't the conclusion at the end?
Oh,
You introduce Henrietta,
okay.
right?
Okay. Next, we will have Henrietta Hand come to us with our illustrations for Henrietta. So I'll introduce Henrietta here. Henrietta.
I'm going to explain some of the data that is presented graphically in the studies that have been cited in this debate. I'll begin with the graphs that are in favor of empowerment. Please bear with me while I share my screen. graphs from the study by Cook and others, 2005, represent the experimental group who received supported employment with squares and the control group who did not receive supported employment with triangles. The top left graph represents the average percentage of participants who are competitively employed. You can see here the experimental group is significantly higher than the control group. In the top right graph, this shows the average percentage of participants who work 40 or more hours per month. Again, the experimental group has a higher rate, although not as drastically different as the first graph. And finally, the bottom graph depicts the average number of dollars earned per month. Once again, the supported employment group earns more dollars per month than the controlled group, as much as approximately $50 more in the final data point on this graph. Next, we have a study by Bond and others, 2004, who demonstrates significant increase in employment rates after converting from a day treatment model to a supported employment model. The light gray represents the pre-conversion employment rates, and the black line stands for the post-conversion employment rates. As you can see, there are significant differences between the two. Also in this study, it provides data on employment rates in 9 randomized controlled trials of supported employment. These trials take place across random dates and 9 different states. And you can see in this graph, New Hampshire, New York, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., South Carolina, Indiana, New York, California, and Maryland, all significantly higher rates of employment with supported employment versus the control. On the pro-care side of the debate, we have Kay and others, 2011. They did a survey of employers to find out why they might be hesitant to hire someone with disabilities. You can see here there are 14 different possible reasons listed, but we'll go over the first 3. These include worry about the cost of accommodations the person might require, a lack of knowledge of how to handle the needs of a person with disability, and a fear of being unable to discipline or fire a person with disabilities. And you can see these top 3 reasons, 80% or more of the participants, the respondents, were in agreement with these 3 reasons. And finally, also in the same study, they asked about reasons for not retaining employees with disabilities. The top 3 answers were similar to the previously stated reasons: a lack of knowledge on handling the needs of a person with disabilities. They're afraid that the workers who develop disabilities will become a liability to them, and they're worried about the cost of providing reasonable accommodations so that the workers can do their jobs. And you can see here that 79, almost 80% and above are in agreement with these 3 statements. So these are some of the graphs that are related to this debate.
Okay, thank you then, Henrietta, for sharing the graphs with us. Next, we will have Ashley as our fielder coming to you with questions and answers. Is that correct? Ashley?
Yep.
Take it away.
So we're just going to cover some frequently asked questions that we've had regarding our topic for empowerment and care. on adult and youth transition services. So the first question we had was, what legal examples are there related to this debate? So legal issues surrounding care may focus on the government's red tape, which proved detrimental to the overall growth and opportunities provided to those with ASD. State and federal laws, legislatures, and district-wide boundaries can be limiting to one's right to empowerment and independence that can be gained from proper facilitated services for all ages. For example, the governments impose age cutoffs, forcing wait lists, and in Canada, there is little regulation in terms of who and what constitutes as a special educator. The training provided to meet these qualifications are at times inappropriate and insufficient, leaving trained staff as lead supporters in the ASD community who have little background, diminishing the chances for empowerment. There are several legal cases in Canada that reflect families whose children were denied the right to empowerment based on government laws, which denied access to education and basic liberties by stating only children with ASD between the ages of 2 to 6 would receive ABA services. In the cases of Weinberg, Destin, and Segarian in Ontario, supportive education among these various school boards was not provided at the public school level. As a result, these families filed lawsuits against the Ministries of Health, Education, and Social Services in order to fight for the rights of their children, to move them beyond care, seeking empowering opportunities in healthcare and education, regardless of their age. In the United States, in 1982, the Board of Education of the Hendrick Hudson Central School District was sued by the Rowley family, defending their daughter's right to equal opportunity and fair education. Their daughter, Amy, was deaf and initially provided with an interpreter in class. However, after a 2-week period, her instructor had deemed her a proficient lip reader, rendering his services unnecessary. In a follow-up IEP meeting, the family argued that the FM wireless device used in place of an interpreter was not sufficient in terms of allowing for the same and rightful education for their daughter as her peers. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 at the time did not see the need or value in providing the requested support to individuals with disabilities within the school board. Laws and legislations of state governments did not account for required supportive services to facilitate and empower disabled children to actually reach their potential and optimal learning aptitude. The courts have deemed that the school board was only acting as a care provider to students with disabilities based on the EHA Act. It was never in their intent to provide services to empower and enrich the lives or provide opportunity to the students they were allowing into their schools. The act served as another handicap for these students in life who were being permitted into the schools without any intent for follow-through, appropriate, or opportune education. Another question we were asked was, how do legal outcomes relate to the pros and cons of this debate? So some of the pros that we have discussed are that lawsuits challenge government laws at all levels and pave the way for future opportunities for all within the ASD community. Without the voices of the suffering, new legislations, centers, funding opportunities, and services may not surface or even progress. It is unfortunate that it has come to this level, that families have to put forth their life savings, air their family history to the public based on a section of society that has deemed certain people ineligible to the same rights and freedoms that others openly have and take for granted. Other considerations are the impact on society. When we empower people, we release pressure on the system of care. When empowered, all members in the family are able to regain their own independence, trusting in the treatment and services that have been afforded and are made available to their child at any stage. Some of the cons are that families spend all their time and money in an already mentally, emotionally, and financially draining situation on sometimes a whim or cloud of hope for change. The main fact is that even in 2016, families are still fighting for their rights when the right to empowerment, fair and proper education, smooth transitions, transition services should be provided automatically and not begged for or drawn out. In 2009, 62 lawsuits were studied surrounding families who had sued their school boards over fundamental and so-called routine expectations that had been violated based on the provisions of IDEA. When these lawsuits were examined, 63% of the schools sued successfully triumphed their case, where only 29% of the families involved within the 62 cases some form of justice served for their child. A third question we had is, what are the connections that can be made to the ethical codes? So Henrietta will share the first one.
The first ethical code related to our debate is 1.05, Professional and Scientific Relationships. This code relates to discrimination. Students in the school have been discriminated against because of their disabilities. There's evidence to show that schools have not provided equal opportunity to students in need. Post-secondary, we see adults who have been discriminated against by employers and other employees.
Do you want me to introduce everyone?
It doesn't matter. I think we can just go. I'll do the next one. Code 2.05, rights and prerogatives of clients. Clients and students' rights have not always been held in regard. Families are left in the lurch, adults left without hope or plans. However, on the flip side, we have seen situations such as VR services where providers are supported and clients' rights are made paramount.
Okay. Code 2.09, treatment, intervention, and efficacy. Clients have the right to effective treatment based on the research and literature and adopted to individual clients. Behavior analysts always have the obligation to advocate for and educate the client about scientifically supported, most effective treatments, procedures have been validated as having both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and society. Is that the right one? And behavior analysts have the responsibility to advocate for appropriate amounts and levels of service provision and oversight required to meet the defined behavior change programs and goals. And also, in those instances where more than one scientifically supported treatment has been established, additional factors may be considered in selecting interventions, and including but not limited to the efficacy, the cost effectiveness, risk, and side effects of the intervention. That's the right one. Behavior analysts also have to review, appraise the effects of any treatment about which they are aware of, and the fact that they might impact the goals and behavior change programs and their possible impact on the behavior change programs to the extent possible.
Sorry. (2.15) Interrupting or discontinuing services. There are instances in which schools have not provided an opportunity for empowerment beyond their walls, where transition plans have been stalled, dropped, or no efforts were made to facilitate continued services. However, in accordance with IDEA, when followed, transition plans, when started early enough, can provide and capture those future opportunities.
(4.02) Involving clients in planning and consent. Students, adults should always be invited to join in on their transition planning services or any behavioral treatment planning and changes if their function level permits. This encourages another level of empowerment when seeking transitional services or looking at the next steps in life.
The fourth question we had was, what do you think are some of the implications of employers not hiring people with disabilities? So we thought that employers may have the opinion that it is more beneficial in the end to not become educated and to not hire those with a disability based on their own preconceived notions of the needs that person may have. They are taking the choice for continued education and employment opportunity away from others based on their own fear, a fear which drives this vulnerable population into the arms of care and inopportunity. This in turn increases the cost of other services, placing a greater strain on society as a whole and on services such as healthcare and insurance. That is a reference from K. Jans Jones, 2011. Our last question, which everyone will chime in on, is what do you see as the biggest promoter of empowerment to those with ASD? And likewise, what is the biggest proponent of care? So I thought that time was a big factor in empowerment and is the key to most things in autism. If we plan for transitions early, by the time a student graduates, they'll have the necessary tools needed to be successful in the next chapter. When looking at empowerment overall, it's more than academics. Students and adults need to be provided with the opportunities to acquire and master daily living and social skills that are typical and relevant to the culture and society in which they live. And in terms of care, I believe the biggest proponent here are families whose guilt or denial can sometimes be an overriding factor. Therefore, they take on the tasks that their family member with autism could or would be capable of doing on their own. Without self-promotion from inside the family system, it is harder to empower and provide opportunities of independence for our students. I don't know if anyone else actually has anything else to add, but.
Well, I feel a big proponent of empowerment that we're seeing more of currently are places of employment that specifically hire people with autism spectrum disorders and really try to tap into special skills that people with ASD have. And so I think as we see more of those places develop, that there will be more opportunities for people with ASD to have employment. And that's a huge factor in empowerment.
I thought advocacy was very important. I believe the biggest promoter for employment is advocacy. And nothing I thought was more important, someone to speak on that individual's behalf, or as in a job coach, or to properly train them, to set them up for the proper training, and to understand their needs and wants. For whatever reason, if the individual doesn't like noise, then the person would make sure they're not placed in employment that is very noisy or something to that effect. So I think advocacy is very important on their behalf for empowerment.
Okay, so in conclusion, both empowerment targeted concepts and care targeted concepts are looking out for what they believe to be the person's best interest. Based on our findings, empowerment more so promotes independence by providing services such as transitional services, which is designed to give the person a voice of their future goals, community employment counseling through VR, which is designed to promote independence through vocational goals, and supported community employment through the use of job coaches, which is designed to promote integration into the community. On the other hand, families have reported very negative experience with transitional services, which have often proven to fail due to a number of reasons, but mainly not allowing the individual to have a voice. VR costs seem to be high, with numbers such as Michigan spending $119 million in 2014, and employers often have a negative outlook on hiring people with disabilities. With that being said, Team Care would choose to protect our clients from the negatives to promote health and safety, while Team Empowerment would promote independence in any way possible, particularly through competitive community employment. With ethical codes such as 2.05 Rights and Prerogatives of Clients, 2.09 Treatment Intervention Efficacy, and 4.02 Involvement involving planning and consent, and more being questioned on either or side, it can be a fine line and very situational as far as what is best for the individual with the disability, care, or empowerment. We have thoroughly enjoyed learning about the different aspects and hope you all have taken away some new knowledge from our debate. Thank you.